The air in the house feels thick as I stand frozen in the doorway, staring at her, the woman I thought I knew, entangled with another man. Her soft, satisfied breaths echo in the silence, and for a moment, the world outside seems to disappear. I can't move. My heart pounds in my chest as she looks at him with the same gaze she once reserved for me, a gaze I thought was ours alone. The realization sinks in like cold, sharp glass. Everything I thought I knew is a lie. Max, our dog, looks up at me briefly from the corner of the room, his tail wagging innocently as if nothing's wrong. But I can't unsee what I've just seen. Before I can find my voice, she glances over, and our eyes meet. I can explain, she says. But I can't bear to hear her lies. I turn and walk away, the door slamming behind me, my world collapsing with every step. But the real story starts before this moment, when I first began to notice the little things that didn't add up. The small clues that would eventually lead me here. I didn't see it coming. Or at least, that's what I tell myself every time I replay the events in my head. I wish I could have told myself sooner that something was wrong. That something was off. Maybe it was the way Jennifer's laugh didn't reach her eyes anymore, or the way she would stare at her phone for longer than was normal, her fingers swiping, typing, and then hiding it the moment I entered the room. But I didn't want to believe it. I convinced myself it was just stress at work, or maybe just the routine, settling in after 6 years of marriage. Who knew that those little things would be the first signs of an unraveling I was too blind to notice? The early days of our marriage were perfect, or at least I thought so. We were one of those couples everyone admired. We laughed together, supported each other, and made plans for the future. I felt like I had found the woman I would spend the rest of my life with. I never doubted that. But as time went on, things started to change slowly. I couldn't tell you exactly when it happened, but looking back, the clues were there, buried beneath the surface of what seemed like a perfect life. Jennifer became more distant over the past few months. I noticed it mostly in the evenings, when we used to talk about our day, unwind together. She would nod in response to my questions but never really engage. Sometimes she'd sigh as if lost in her own thoughts, her mind miles away. The conversations grew shorter, and the silences longer. At first, I attributed it to exhaustion. After all, she had been taking on extra shifts at the office. But the more I tried to talk to her, the more distant she seemed. It wasn't just her behavior, though. It was the little things that began to slip through the cracks. She would cancel plans without reason or make excuses to stay late at work. And the nights she spent, working late, turned into days where she was meeting clients, or attending events. The excuses piled up, and the distance between us grew. But I kept making excuses for her. I told myself it was just the stress of a new project at work, that she was just tired. We all go through phases where we feel disconnected, right? I tried to break through, to get her to talk to me. I asked her, gently, about what was going on. But each time, she would brush it off with a laugh and a wave of her hand. "Oh, it's nothing," she'd say. "I'm just busy." And I'd let it go, believing her. But inside I began to feel like I was losing her, even though I couldn't explain why. It was like I could feel the absence of her presence, a space growing between us, though she was still right there in front of me. Max, our golden retriever, was the only one who still seemed to care. He'd follow me around the house, nudging me with his snout when I sat in silence, trying to process my growing sense of unease. Sometimes, I'd just sit on the couch, staring at the wall, lost in my thoughts while Jennifer spent hours on her phone. Max would rest his head on my lap, as if to remind me that someone still cared. It was comforting in a way, but it also made me realize how much I was depending on the dog to fill a void in my marriage. I remember one evening in particular. Jennifer had come home later than usual, and I was sitting on the couch with Max curled up beside me. The house was quiet, the sound of the ticking clock more pronounced than ever. She walked in, a little disheveled, a slight flush on her cheeks that I didn't quite recognize. Her eyes met mine, and for a split second, something flickered in her expression, something I couldn't name. But then she smiled and walked over to kiss me on the cheek. "Hey, babe," she said casually, like everything was normal. But I could tell it wasn't. She hadn't even looked at me properly that evening, almost like she was trying to avoid me. Her smile didn't feel genuine, and the kiss on my cheek was a little too quick. That night, I tried to talk to her again. I asked her if everything was all right, if she was feeling okay. She paused, looking at me for a moment like she was processing my words, and then shook her head. Yeah, of course, she said with a forced chuckle. I'm just tired. You know how work is. I nodded, trying to suppress the knot that had formed in my stomach. But something in her tone, the way she averted her eyes, told me it was more than that. It wasn't work. It was something else. And I knew deep down that I was starting to lose her. But I couldn't admit it to myself yet. I didn't want to. That night, I went to bed alone, as I had been doing more and more recently. Jennifer stayed up late, on her phone as usual. I didn't think much of it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. And then Max did something that would change everything. He came into the bedroom, a small, unfamiliar object in his mouth. It was a shiny, expensive-looking bracelet. I frowned as I took it from him, wondering where he could have found it. Jennifer had never mentioned anything about a new bracelet. In fact, I'd never seen her wear anything like it. I showed it to her, trying to mask my growing suspicion. Is this yours? I asked casually, holding it up. Jennifer's face went pale, and her eyes widened for a split second before she quickly recovered and smiled. Oh, that's not mine, she said, her voice a little too high-pitched. Max must have picked it up somewhere. I don't know where it came from. But something in the way she said it, the way she quickly dismissed it, made my heart sink. I didn't know what to make of it, but I knew then that something was terribly wrong. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept racing, replaying everything, the missed signs, the little changes, and now the bracelet. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being lied to. But the truth, the full truth, wouldn't come to light until much later. And when it did, it would hit me like a freight train, taking everything I thought I knew and shattering it in an instant. The bracelet was the first real clue. Sure, there were other things, moments that felt odd, things that didn't add up, but that was the first time something concrete had crossed my path. Jennifer had brushed it off so easily, but I could feel the weight of it hanging in the air. I didn't want to believe it meant anything, but every time I looked at it, the more it gnawed at me. Where had it come from? And why hadn't Jennifer mentioned it? I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe I was just overreacting. It was easy to tell myself that, to convince myself that it was nothing. After all, I trusted Jennifer. We had built a life together, and I wasn't about to let one small object shatter everything. But something deep down told me that I couldn't ignore it. The more I thought about it, the more questions came to mind, and the more my mind drifted to the idea that there was more to this than just a misplaced bracelet. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards, or the wind rustling outside. Jennifer was already asleep beside me, her breathing steady and calm. But I couldn't sleep. My thoughts raced, spinning out of control. I kept imagining the worst, thinking of the possibilities that could explain what had been happening. Was there someone else? Had she been lying to me all along? I pulled the blanket tighter around me, trying to push the thoughts away, but they clung to me like a shadow. I couldn't stop thinking about the bracelet. Max had found it, so it must have been dropped somewhere, right? But where? And why hadn't Jennifer noticed it missing? She had always been meticulous about her things. She knew where everything was. And yet, this unfamiliar item had somehow made its way into our home. The next few days were a blur of quiet suspicion. I tried to act normal, to keep the peace, but it was like there was a weight in the air that neither of us could ignore. Jennifer continued to be distracted, absorbed in her phone more and more. I tried to engage her in conversation, but she'd give short, half-hearted answers and quickly change the subject. It was like I wasn't even there. The woman I had once known, the one I'd spent years with, seemed to be slipping away right before my eyes. Max's behavior became more peculiar too. He was still his usual, loving self, but now and then, I'd catch him sneaking around the house with something in his mouth. At first, it was just small things, a forgotten pen, a sock I'd left lying around, a random scrap of paper. But it didn't stop there. Over the next few days, he started bringing home more strange items. One afternoon, he trotted in with a pair of sunglasses in his mouth, Ray-Ban sunglasses, the kind I would never buy for myself, let alone anyone else. Jennifer didn't wear sunglasses like that. I knew that for a fact. When I asked her about them, she shrugged it off. Max must have found them on his walk. I'm sure it's nothing. But I wasn't so sure anymore. These things didn't just appear out of nowhere. And Max had never been the type of dog to pick up things that didn't belong to us. Something was going on, and I could feel it creeping closer. I decided to take matters into my own hands. It wasn't like me. I wasn't the type to snoop, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being lied to. And at that point, I was desperate to know the truth. I didn't even know where to start. So, I began with her phone. I had never gone through Jennifer's things before. I had always trusted her, and the idea of invading her privacy felt wrong. But I told myself that if I didn't find answers, I would lose my mind. I needed something to make sense of the mess my thoughts had become. One evening, after she'd gone to bed, I found myself staring at her phone on the nightstand. My heart raced as I picked it up. I hadn't seen any signs of her being overly secretive with her phone, but she had become more protective of it lately, always swiping it out of sight when I walked into the room, holding it close to her chest when I sat next to her. I'd made excuses for it before, telling myself it was just a coincidence, or that she had work emails to tend to. But now, in the dead of night, I couldn't stop the gnawing feeling that there was something I wasn't seeing. With trembling hands, I unlocked the phone. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, messages, photos, anything, but I had to do it. I scrolled through her texts first, my eyes scanning for anything that stood out. Most of the messages were mundane, work-related stuff, some texts from friends, plans for upcoming events. But then, about halfway down the list, I saw a string of messages that made my stomach turn. The names weren't familiar, but the words were. Can't wait to see you again tonight. I miss you. Another message. I don't care if you're married. I just want you. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. My heart dropped into my stomach as I realized who these messages were from. My eyes scanned further, seeing more messages, each one more intimate than the last. There was no denying it anymore. Jennifer was having an affair. I felt a wave of nausea hit me, the blood draining from my face. The world around me felt like it was spinning. I put the phone down, my hands shaking, my mind scrambling to process what I had just uncovered. I couldn't believe it. I had been married to her for 6 years, and this whole time, she had been lying to me. I felt a deep, hollow emptiness wash over me, and for a moment, I couldn't even breathe. I spent the rest of the night awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to comprehend what I had just learned. I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand the truth, to make her face the lies. But the other part of me was paralyzed, unable to move or make sense of the chaos inside my head. How had it come to this? Had I missed every sign? Were there more secrets? And what was I supposed to do now? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The truth had been staring me in the face for weeks, and now I had the proof. There was no turning back. I didn't know what I expected when I found out. I guess I thought there'd be a moment of clarity, like some sort of relief that I finally had the truth, that I could stop living in a fog of uncertainty. But instead, it was like a bomb had gone off inside me, and I was left in the aftermath, trying to pick up the pieces of everything I thought I knew. The betrayal didn't just hurt, it shattered me, and the weight of it pressed down on me so hard that I could barely breathe. That night, after I found the messages, I couldn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, my mind spinning. The silence in the room felt suffocating. Jennifer slept soundly next to me, unaware that I now knew everything. I kept staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what I had just learned, but nothing made sense. How had she done this to me? How had she looked me in the eye every day and lied without a second thought? I thought about waking her up, confronting her right then and there. But the idea of it terrified me. I had so many questions, but no answers. How would she react? Would she deny it? Would she come up with some excuse, some lie that would twist everything around and make me doubt what I had seen? I knew I couldn't let her manipulate me again. But I also knew that if I didn't confront her soon, I would go insane. The suspense was eating me alive. The next day was a blur. Jennifer acted as if nothing had changed. She was her usual self, distracted, distant, wrapped up in her own little world, like she didn't have a care in the world. I watched her, my stomach churning with the knowledge that she had betrayed me, and she had no idea that I knew. It was like living in some twisted parallel universe, where everything appeared normal on the outside, but inside my whole world was falling apart. That evening, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I had to confront her. I had to hear her side of it, even if I already knew the truth. I waited for the right moment, but there never seemed to be a right time. There were always distractions: Max barking at the door, the TV playing in the background, Jennifer humming some song to herself as she flipped through a magazine. It was like the universe was conspiring to keep me from doing what I knew had to be done. But finally, after dinner, as the night settled in and the quiet of the house wrapped around us, I couldn't wait any longer. I had to know. I stood up from the couch, my heart hammering in my chest, and walked over to where she was sitting. "Jennifer," I said, my voice rough with emotion. She didn't look up at first, just kept flipping through her magazine, as if nothing was wrong. "Jennifer," I repeated, my voice firmer this time. She glanced up, raising an eyebrow. "What's up?" I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. How could she act so casual when everything was falling apart? How could she just sit there, pretending nothing was wrong? But I pushed the anger aside, determined to stay calm. "I need to ask you something," I said, my voice quieter now. "I need to know the truth." She set the magazine down and looked at me, her expression shifting slightly, like she knew this conversation was going to be important. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice defensive, but still casual, like she was pretending nothing was wrong. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "The bracelet," I said, staring at her intently. "The one Max brought in a few days ago. It wasn't yours, was it? Where did it come from?" Her eyes flickered, just for a split second, but it was enough to make my pulse race. She wasn't prepared for this. She hadn't thought I would notice. I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out what to say, what excuse to pull out of the air. But this time, I wasn't giving her a chance to lie. "It's not just that, though," I continued, my voice growing steadier, even though every word felt like it was being ripped from my chest. "Max has been bringing home things that don't belong to us. Sunglasses. Other stuff. And the worst part is, I found your messages." The room went dead silent. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Jennifer's face had gone pale, and I could see the panic starting to settle in. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. I had expected a response, some sort of defense, but there was nothing. "Jennifer, who is he?" I asked, my voice low and steady, though every part of me was screaming with rage and hurt. "Who are you seeing behind my back?" She opened her mouth again, but still no words came. She was trapped, caught in her own web of lies, and I wasn't going to let her twist her way out of it this time. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me like she always had. The truth was out now, and it couldn't be denied. I don't know what you mean," she finally said, her voice shaky. It was an attempt to deny everything, to pull the wool over my eyes again. But it wasn't working. "Don't lie to me," I snapped, my voice rising. "I've seen the messages. I've seen everything. You can't keep lying your way out of this." She finally seemed to realize that I wasn't going to back down. Her eyes shifted away from mine, and I saw her jaw tighten. She looked guilty, but she wasn't ready to admit it. "Not yet." She started, but I cut her off. Who is he, Jennifer? I demanded, my voice growing louder. Tell me. Who's the guy you've been seeing? For a long moment, she didn't say anything. She just looked at me, her eyes darting away as if she were trying to find a way to avoid the truth. But I could see it in her face. She knew she had been caught. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said finally, her voice almost pleading. It just happened. I never wanted to hurt you, I swear. I didn't think you'd ever find out. I felt a wave of nausea rise in me as I heard her words. There it was, the classic excuse. The same one every cheater uses. It's never intentional. It's never their fault. It just happens. So you've been seeing someone behind my back, I said, my voice cold now, detached from the emotions that had been swirling just moments before. You think I'm that stupid, Jennifer? That I wouldn't notice? She didn't respond. She just sat there, her eyes brimming with tears. It was pathetic, really. She was crying now, but it didn't change anything. She had made her choice. She had betrayed me, and no amount of tears could undo that. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I never meant for you to find out this way. I was trying to protect you. Protect me? I asked, incredulous. From what? The truth? She looked down at her hands, and for the first time, she seemed genuinely ashamed. I never wanted to hurt you, she repeated, her voice barely audible. But I've been unhappy. You weren't there for me anymore, and I found someone who made me feel wanted again. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. This was the moment. The moment I realized how little she had truly cared. The man she had been seeing wasn't just a mistake, he was her escape. He was the answer to a problem she hadn't even bothered to talk to me about. And now, I was left here, devastated, betrayed by the person I had trusted the most. The silence between us stretched on, and I realized there was nothing left to say. The truth was out, but there was nothing left to fix. The days that followed the confrontation felt like a slow-motion train wreck. The shock hadn't worn off, but it had been replaced by something darker, an aching, gnawing emptiness that settled deep inside me. I kept going through the motions, but each moment felt like I was living in someone else's life, watching myself from a distance. Nothing felt real. Not the house we'd built, not the life we'd shared, and certainly not Jennifer's tear-filled apologies. Jennifer had begged me to forgive her. She told me she was sorry over and over, promising that it would never happen again, that she was confused, and that the affair had been a mistake. But no matter how many times she said it, the words felt hollow. Every apology seemed more rehearsed than genuine. She wasn't sorry for me, she was sorry for herself, sorry that she had been caught. I didn't know what to feel anymore. I had spent 6 years of my life with this woman. I had trusted her more than I had trusted anyone in my life. And now she had shattered that trust in the worst way possible. But at the same time, there was a part of me that wanted to believe her, that wanted to believe she could change, that we could fix this. That was the part of me still holding on to the woman I thought she was, the woman I loved. But as the days dragged on, I started to realize just how much I had been lying to myself. This wasn't the first time Jennifer had been distant. It wasn't even the second. Over the last few months, I had noticed her pulling away, spending more time on her phone, getting irritated at the smallest things, becoming more absent in our conversations. I had blamed it on stress, on work, on everything but the truth. The truth was staring me in the face, and I had ignored it because I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't help but think about all the times I had made excuses for her. The times she had been too tired to talk, too busy to spend time together, too distracted to notice me. I had convinced myself it was nothing. It was always something else. But now it was clear. She had been distracted by someone else. Someone who had stolen the attention that should have been mine. I had been betrayed. I had been living a lie. And I didn't know how to pick up the pieces of myself that had been broken in the process. Max seemed to be the only thing keeping me grounded during this time. The days felt like they were crawling by, but when I saw his big, brown eyes staring up at me, full of love and loyalty, it was like a small, quiet reminder that I wasn't entirely lost. I'd never realized how much of a comfort he had been in my life until now. Dogs don't lie, and they don't cheat. They just love. It was the only thing in my life that felt real anymore. But even Max couldn't fill the hole Jennifer's betrayal had left in me. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I closed my eyes, every time I tried to sleep, all I could see was her with him, the man she had betrayed me for. I had seen the messages. I had seen the lies she had spun. And I couldn't unsee it. The worst part was the feeling of powerlessness. I couldn't change what had happened. I couldn't turn back time. I couldn't erase the truth, no matter how badly I wanted to. I kept telling myself I should be angry, that I should be furious with her, that I should demand answers. But there was a deeper emotion at play, one that I didn't know how to process. Sadness. I felt so damned sad. Sad for the love we'd lost, sad for the trust that was gone, sad for the future that would never be what I thought it would be. Jennifer continued to try to repair things, but I couldn't bring myself to believe her. Her words didn't have the same weight anymore. They didn't feel real. I could see the cracks in her facade, the way she avoided eye contact when she talked about the affair, the way she kept apologizing as if it would somehow make everything better. She wasn't even trying to make things right, she was just trying to ease her own guilt. And that made me even angrier. One night, after another tense dinner where Jennifer tried to explain herself yet again, I snapped. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't sit there pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. I stood up from the table and walked out of the room, my chest tight with a suffocating mixture of anger and sadness. I went outside and sat on the porch, staring at the stars. The cool night air did nothing to calm the fire that was burning inside me. I felt like I was drowning in betrayal, drowning in sadness, drowning in confusion. I wanted to scream, to hit something, to make the pain stop. But it wouldn't. It couldn't. The emotional toll of what had happened was too much. There was no way to escape it. No way to outrun it. The worst part was that I had no one to talk to. Jennifer had isolated me from my friends, from my family. She had been so controlling, so focused on keeping up appearances, that I had lost touch with everyone who mattered. Now, as I sat on that porch, the weight of isolation felt like a physical thing. I was alone in this. Alone in my pain. Alone in my heartbreak. I looked at the empty space next to me. Jennifer hadn't come out to join me. She was still inside, pretending everything was okay. Pretending like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. And I didn't know how to live in this new reality. I felt so lost. Like the person I had been before, the person who trusted, who loved, who believed in the good in people, no longer existed. The person I was now, the person who had been betrayed, was nothing like that. I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know how to move forward. Max trotted over and sat down next to me, nuzzling his head against my leg. His presence was a small comfort, but it didn't erase the ache in my chest. I was broken. And I wasn't sure how to fix it. A week passed, and nothing seemed to change. Jennifer's apologies had become more frequent, but they felt like empty words. She tried to make things right in small ways, cooking me dinner, cleaning the house, being extra sweet, but it didn't work. None of it worked. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't ready to forgive her either. I kept telling myself I should make a decision. I couldn't live in this limbo forever, caught between the life I had known and the painful truth of what had happened. But what was the right decision? What was I supposed to do when everything that had been solid and real was suddenly built on lies? Could I even trust her again? Could I trust anyone again? Every conversation with Jennifer felt like we were pretending to be something we weren't. We sat across from each other, talking about mundane things, Max's vet appointment, the weather, our friends, but it was all just noise. The real conversation, the one that needed to happen, was unspoken. The elephant in the room was suffocating me, and every time I tried to breathe, it felt like I was choking on it. The thing was, I didn't hate her. I hated what she had done to me, but I didn't hate her. Not yet. And that confused me even more. Shouldn't I be angry? Shouldn't I want to burn everything down and leave her behind? Shouldn't I want revenge for the way she had humiliated me, for the way she had taken my trust and destroyed it without a second thought? But instead I just felt numb. I felt like I was going through the motions, doing what I had to do to get through the day. The hardest part was figuring out what I wanted. Did I want to fix this? Could I fix it? One night, after another quiet dinner where Jennifer kept trying to pull me into small talk, I found myself asking the question out loud. Do you think we can fix this? I asked, not looking at her. My voice was hoarse, like I had been holding back something for too long. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. She didn't look surprised. I think she had been waiting for me to ask it. Finally, she replied, her voice soft. I want to fix this. I swear I do. I know I've made a huge mistake, and I know I hurt you. But I love you. I want this to work. I could hear the desperation in her voice. It was hard to ignore. But a part of me couldn't bring myself to believe her. Couldn't bring myself to believe that she was being genuine. I don't know if I can trust you again, I said, my voice low. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way. What if I can't forgive you? What if I just can't move past this? There was silence between us, a long stretch of time where nothing seemed to matter. I felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I could feel my mind racing, going through every scenario, every possible outcome. Should I stay? Should I leave? Could I even go back to being the man I was before? The man who trusted her? The man who loved her? And then the strangest thing happened. I realized I didn't know what was best for me anymore. I had spent so long trying to be the good husband, trying to make things work, that I had forgotten about myself. I had forgotten what I needed. I had spent so much time worrying about her feelings, about making her happy, that I had lost track of my own happiness. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I was the one who had to make the choice, and it couldn't just be about saving the marriage. It had to be about me, too. For the first time since the betrayal, I allowed myself to think about what I truly wanted. And the answer came to me clearly. I didn't want this. I didn't want a life built on lies. I didn't want to be with someone who had betrayed me, no matter how many apologies she gave, no matter how much she begged. I wanted to find myself again. I wanted to rebuild my life, piece by piece, without looking over my shoulder, without wondering if the woman beside me was lying to my face. Jennifer, I said, my voice steady now, even though it felt like my heart was breaking all over again. I can't do this anymore. I don't think I can trust you again. I don't think I can forgive you for what you've done. Her face fell, the color draining from her cheeks as she realized what I was saying. She opened her mouth to say something, but I held up a hand, stopping her. I've been so focused on making this work, on making you happy, that I've lost sight of what I need. And what I need is peace. What I need is to not feel like I'm drowning in lies every day. What I need is to stop wondering if you're going to betray me again. Her eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. Maybe I should have. Maybe I should have cared more about her pain. But I couldn't. Not after everything. Not after how she had shattered everything I thought I knew. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted this. I know you didn't, I replied, my voice calm. But it doesn't change anything. We sat in silence for a long moment, neither of us saying anything. I think we both knew it was over. I wasn't going to forgive her. I wasn't going to stay. There was nothing left to say. I stood up, walking toward the door, feeling the weight of the decision finally starting to settle in. My chest felt lighter, but there was still a deep sadness in my heart. I was leaving behind a life I had thought was real, a life I had built with someone I had loved. But in the end, I had to choose myself. I think it's time for me to go, I said, my voice tight. I need space. I need to heal. She didn't say anything more. I didn't wait for her response. I just walked out the door, leaving behind the life we had shared, and stepping into the unknown future that awaited me. The weeks after I left Jennifer were a blur. I moved out of the house, got my own place, and began to rebuild. But I was also learning to live with the aftermath, the deep, gnawing sadness of what had been lost and the fragile hope that things might get better. Every day was a little bit easier, but the hurt never fully went away. I spent a lot of time reflecting on everything. On how I had let myself get caught up in a relationship that was built on false promises. On how, despite everything, I had ignored the red flags because I wanted so badly to believe in her and in us. It took a long time, but I came to terms with the fact that the person I loved, the woman I had married, wasn't the woman I thought she was. And that realization hurt more than anything. But I also came to understand something important. I had to let go. Not just of her, but of the version of myself that had lived in that relationship. The one who had been afraid to ask questions, who had ignored the warning signs, who had stayed because it was easier than facing the truth. The hardest part was learning to trust again. Not just other people, but myself. My instincts had been right all along, but I had ignored them because I wanted to believe in something that wasn't real. Moving forward, I knew I had to trust myself more, listen to my gut, and never ignore the warning signs again. Jennifer had called a few times, asking if we could talk, but I couldn't bring myself to have that conversation. The wounds were too fresh, and I wasn't ready to open them up again. I don't know what her future holds, but mine was in my hands now. I could finally shape it the way I wanted, free from the shadows of betrayal. If there's one thing I've learned from this, it's that betrayal changes you. It strips away your illusions and forces you to confront who you are and what you want. And in the end, it makes you stronger. To anyone going through something similar, my advice is this: trust your instincts. Don't let the fear of being alone keep you in a relationship that's hurting you. Letting go isn't easy, but sometimes it's the only way forward. The hardest part is over. And for the first time in a long time, I'm starting to feel like myself again. Leave a comment with your thoughts on the story. And subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new interesting stories. See you soon.